Welcome back. And I hope you had a wonderful lunch, got some fresh air. We are now getting ready to start our second, what should you call it, like adventure of the day. And I'm so glad Oliver is back to share his wisdom with us. Because I still believe that technology is best when you can't see it. When it's not getting in your way, or when it just works, which it never really does. And this invisibility also brings with it a fallacy of thinking that it's free of cost and free of consequence. Oliver is here to tell us that that's not necessarily the case. And it's time to consider technology from a holistic perspective beyond environmental sustainability. Fluent in both tech and business, and ideally found on the back of a bike, Oliver is here to share his latest observations from the field of enterprise design. Please give him a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Guru. Is this microphone working? Yeah? Okay, you can hear me, good. So yeah, thank you for that introduction. I think a lot of the talks today have talked a lot about kind of design and technology's ability to kind of help organizations be more sustainable. But as Guru alluded to, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the kind of hidden impacts of technology and perhaps challenge some of your perceptions around this. So before I get into that, a little bit of background on myself. So Oliver Cronk, or Ollie, I had an interesting sort of upbringing and kind of education sort of decision to make around, do I stay in science? I was really passionate about science as a kid. Do I do tech? Which one wins? In the end, the tech, the geek in me was so strong, I ended up going down the technology path. But I've always had a scientifically curious sort of mind. And I ended up, after working in the financial sector, technology for banks, I ended up actually at an energy and climate change consultancy in Oxfordshire, in the UK. And it was amazing. I spent 4 years there doing some great work with the likes of DEFRA, the European Environment Agency, the European Commission, all these things. This lovely time that was pre-Brexit, there wasn't even a twinkle in anyone's eye, and we were doing amazing work across Europe. Unfortunately, the financial crisis of 2008 happened, and then all of a sudden I switched from gamekeeper to poacher, and I went from protecting the environment to going to work for one of the big energy companies that were, unfortunately running most of Europe's coal capacity, so RWE, who still run quite a lot of the coal capacity. So a little bit of a difficult situation, but I had to do it because that's just the way that the economy was pushing my career. But I've always looked for an opportunity to kind of get back into that world of, thinking about climate and the impacts. So fortuitously today, to bring you kind of up to date, I'm now working for a company called Scott Logic. I joined them a year ago, and part of what I'm doing is research and development, but specifically a large part of my time is spent looking at how to make technology more sustainable, and what's its impact, what's its footprint. And I also run a podcast called Architect Tomorrow, and that's very much about inspiring everyone working in architecture and design to think about how do we architect a better tomorrow, and including sort of sustainability challenges. So what I love, actually, hands up if you recognize this paragraph that says, contributing to life thriving on this planet, enterprises must start to bake sustainability into their assets and spot purposeful opportunities for delivering better products and authentic brands. Do you recognize it? Yeah. A couple of you do. So this is actually on the page for this conference website. And I love this, and I was fortunate enough to kind of work with Wolfgang and Milan and the others on the theme and the talks for the next couple of days. And I was really excited about making sure that I kind of talked about our assets, our digital assets, and thinking about how we represent our brands in an authentic way when it comes to sustainability and climate and things like that. Because unfortunately, there is quite a bit of greenwash going around, and I'll touch on some of that in a minute. So to start with, this architecture for sustainability has to start with one question for me, which is, what sector are you in? What is your enterprise's main core business? And for me, you generally fall into one of two camps. In fact, I'll ask you the question, who in the rooms would say they work for a kind of heavily industrial or physical kind of industry? Show of hands. Okay, a few people. And then on the flip side, who would say that their organization is primarily sort of knowledge economy or digital type things? Okay, so probably a bit more. And maybe show of hands who would say it's sort of 50-50, it's a mixture. Okay. Because for me, this one question steers your initial focus for architecture efforts in sustainability. Because if you are heavily industrial, you've got a lot of physical manufacturing, that's where your biggest impact to the environment and the planet is going to be. And that's where I would say, as architects and designers, we need to be taking our businesses through that thinking. How do we take our organization on that journey that others have spoken about today? How do we bake sustainability into products, into services, and into industrial processes? That's not to say we shouldn't also think about the technology. It's just that first question as an architect is really, really important. If you fall in the knowledge economy, the digital sort of space, or banking, banking is effectively just moving lots of information around, then your focus should really be on the technology assets. And I'll talk a bit more about that. Because those real-world technology assets, and in particular digital products, I think everyone's in this false illusion that they have zero or minimal real-world impact. And this is a wake-up call for me. I mean, even when I was working at the European Environment Agency and doing carbon calculators, it never occurred to me the things I was building and the systems and processes I was putting in to help measure emissions and CO2, actually those things were also consuming, in many cases, significant amounts of energy and needed to be thought about. So I think, unfortunately, the big tech companies have got us fooled. I think there's been a lot of marketing spend on pushing people to cloud. Go to cloud, it'll make you green, it'll make you more sustainable. Will it really, though? What if you're a Nordic-based country and your data center is actually supplied by hydroelectric or renewable energy, and you're going to shift your workload to, say, Berlin, Amazon's Berlin data center, or even London, quite frankly, where the carbon is 3 times the carbon intensity of where you had your on-prem data center. So is it really green to shift to cloud in that instance? It's nuanced. It's not a kind of clear-cut decision one or the other. But I would say there is a lot of, just move to the cloud. It becomes the cloud provider's problem to make it green, make it sustainable, make it enduring. Who recognizes the still grab on the right-hand side, the video that Apple put out recently? Okay, so I was going to play it, but I think I've got other things to talk to you about rather. But so do go and watch it. I'd be interested in your reaction. A lot of people. So essentially, what it is, just quickly, is it's Apple's sort of advert about how they're doing on their sustainability goals, and they're having a conversation with Mother Nature. The character on the screen grab is Mother Nature, and they're trying to justify their improvement on sustainability. For me, I got a bit cringy about it because I think they're dancing around the elephant in the room, which is as much as you can make an Apple iPod, sorry, God, that's dated me, hasn't it? iPhone or Mac, lower impact, and you can use recycled materials and all those sorts of things. If you are the market leader and you are driving refresh cycles every year to 18 months, that everyone wants to do the fast fashion thing and change their device, and you've made it incredibly difficult to repair that device. One of the things that really frustrates me about the mobile industry, I used to work for a mobile telco for a while, is how we actually have gone backwards. How many of you had a sort of Samsung phone 5, 6 plus years ago that you could actually take the back cover off and upgrade the memory, change the battery yourself? It was easy, no tools required, click, take it off, take the battery out, put a new one in. It extended the lifespan of that device. I think it doubled it. And now even Samsung is doing the same as Apple. They're making the device really nice to look at, but it's not repairable. It's not easy to repair. It's really complicated. So I have mixed feelings about, don't get me wrong, I think it's great that they're making the manufacturing process cleaner, but unfortunately, the big tech companies are really dancing around their real impact, their real footprint. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time is walking through the reality versus that greenwash with you. Just so I think what I'm trying to do at the moment, primarily with this talk, is raise awareness so people know the reality. Because I think a lot of people are just walking around unaware of the real impact. And the nice thing was Milan earlier talked about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so what I've done is I've actually mapped technology's impact to the Sustainable Development Goals. So most people will be thinking about the energy consumption. You hear a lot about, make sure your servers are in a place where you're using renewable energy. There's a lot of discussion about the energy consumption. And of course, that's important. Where we get the energy from, the CO2, carbon intensity of that electricity is important. But again, I think we have been blinded to the fact that actually the right-hand side of this picture talks about what's known as embodied carbon. Now, embodied carbon is all of the energy and therefore emissions that were required to extract the materials, produce the device, ship it. And in many cases, particularly for phones, these outweigh any usage. So recharging the device for thousands of times in its lifespan is completely outweighed by the impact that creating that device in the first place had. I mean, like by a factor of like 10 in many cases. It's a bit more nuanced when it comes to sort of servers and enterprise infrastructure, kind of hardware. That's different. It depends on how long you run the device. But there's still a significant amount of embodied carbon, significant amount of impact. And that's even just talking about the carbon. You need to think about the materials. Mining for those materials is getting harder and harder. It's getting even more damaging to the environment to refine and mine materials. And also think about the water usage. So on here, I've got sort of affordable and clean energy, sustainable development goal on the left. That talks about energy consumption. On the right, there's this responsible consumption and production thing, which is what I was talking about with the Apple sort of forced refreshes. That's, in my mind, not responsible. And then you have, just in case you can't see it, so life below water and clean water and sanitation. We're creating a lot of water stress by using so much technology. Just look at AI. There's crazy reports about how much water is being used to cool data centers that have all these GPUs and all this processing power to kind of create the latest AI models. They can do amazing things, but that comes at a cost. It comes at a cost massively, particularly if you think about some data centers are put in water-stressed areas. It's great they might be able to use solar energy, but if they're in a desert region, that water is scarce and should really be used to kind of irrigate land and for drinking water, not for cooling data centers. So some really challenging things here as we scale. And if you think about at the moment, we've only just digitized a small fraction of a lot of our businesses. Well, as we do more, that places more and more demand and more stress in these places where we're putting these data centers. So something to think about. The other pieces in the middle here are life on land and sort of industry, innovation, and infrastructure. You could argue cloud is a more efficient way of running all of our compute, and I'm not saying it isn't. So there is definitely an interesting angle there. I just think we can't be blindsided that there are other impacts to kind of creating large hyperscale data centers. You can't read this one. I'll skip over it quickly. A colleague of mine who works on the design and UX side, I challenged him with saying, hey, I've looked at environmental impact. Why don't you look at social impact? And so he mapped out and looked at things like gender equality, inequalities, health and well-being. And we kind of looked at things like addictive software. We looked at other things around non-inclusive software, kind of excluding groups of our communities, non-inclusive algorithms, going back to AI again, not getting our data sets in a good place so they're not representative of the people that we're serving. There's a whole bunch of things here that they're important, so I don't want to skip over them, but I'm happy to sort of chat about them offline, because otherwise I will be being pushed off stage shortly. But definitely keen to talk to you about these separately if they're of interest. Before I move on, actually, I kind of put a lot of that under the category of the darker side of digital. What are the unexpected consequences of us doing all these technologies? What impacts does it have on society and people? And actually on that theme, what I've done to try and make this easier to kind of consume is start to look at, well, what does this look like? What does sustainable technology mean? I mean, I loved Milan talking about we don't really know. In many cases, it's confusing what that term means. And so a piece of work I collaborated on with the architects from our community and some input from some intersection members as well is this picture here, that's this sort of Venn diagram. And I think the next step is probably to integrate it more with the edgy design language, and we start to think about how these things play into how we're designing architectures, assets, processes, services, brands, and so on. But for me, a lot of what we're focusing on is this black circle, the carbon piece. We talk a lot about CO2. It's important, don't get me wrong, I'm not downplaying climate change. We're sweating here in this building in September when it should be significantly cooler. But there are other green issues that I've talked about. There's interrelated issues. There's a danger of having what's known as carbon tunnel vision, where we're just fixating on CO2 and not the bigger picture. But the thing for me is you also need to include the economic viability. And this is where I divide people with this discussion. Some people think sustainability should just be about the planet and people. And I'm like, no. The origins of this actually are in financial terms. They're kind of having a sustainable economy, having a sustainable business. The financial aspect of this can't be overlooked. Now, I know Christian Felber's keynote in Stockholm was fantastic, and he really kind of got me to rethink things. But I still believe at the moment, unless we want to kind of completely rip up the rule book, we have to think about how things remain profitable and economically viable alongside balancing these other criteria. And in the middle here, we have some of the things that as architects and enterprise designers we've been passionate about for a really long time. So it's things like technical debt or enterprise debt. It's things like security, resilience. It's the availability of skills. It's the impact on people. All of these good things, I think, are all sustainable objectives, sustainability objectives. So for me, enterprise design and enterprise architecture need a little bit of reframing. That a lot of those things are already about sustainability. We just need to include a whole bunch of other non-functional requirements that are a little bit hidden, because I think the technology industry has done a good job of playing down the impact that they have, such that we're taking that sort of bigger picture view. And so for me, this is this holistic piece that Guru introduced me with, was how do we think about this holistically, not just over-indexing on energy consumption and carbon in electricity, but also thinking about that bigger picture. And I think this works, by the way, regardless of whether it's just your tech impact or your impact of your enterprise as a whole. These considerations, I think, are valid across the piece. Something else that I've come across in my work, my team's work, is an organization called the Green Software Foundation. I don't know, show of hands who's heard of the Green Software Foundation? Okay, that's interesting. Okay, couple. So, this team has got the likes of Intel and Microsoft and some of the big tech players and some big banks involved, and they're essentially looking at what are those kind of core things we need to think about when it comes to designing software. So energy efficiency is important, but it's not the only thing. As I said earlier, it's not just about energy consumption. Hardware efficiency is also important, because as I said, every device that we install and every cloud service we consume requires hardware, and that has impact. The carbon awareness. Can we build smarter architectures and smarter systems that use APIs to detect the carbon intensity of the electricity and dial down and dial up according to when the electricity is cleaner and greener? These are all things we can do now, and the Green Software Foundation is doing a great job of raising awareness. The interesting thing is, with my enterprise architect hat on as a security architect for a moment, is the other benefits these bring. So energy efficiency, having simpler solutions, often simpler solutions are more secure. So that's another sort of non-functional requirement, kind of improved by improving efficiency. Hardware efficiency, the more hardware we have, the more assets we have to secure and manage. So there's a security benefit from kind of reducing this as well. And making things carbon aware and adaptive promotes sort of resilience and availability, because we're making our systems more flexible and more adaptable. So it's not just all about saving carbon and saving electricity and saving cost. There's also other impacts as well. This is the framework. Again, these slides will be available. What I've done is essentially boiled down the challenge of thinking about sustainability across the software development lifecycle. So everything from the systems design, which I know a lot of us care and love about and really consider. What are the use cases? What's the design? How are we designing it properly? And considering things like the technical debt. And I'd like to introduce a term to you that perhaps you've not heard before, which is environmental debt. I think it's not just we have legacy systems and we have technical debt, we also have decisions that we took in the past because they were financially profitable for us. They were cheap, but actually they had unintended costs. And a great example of this is the phrase, hardware is cheap. So just throw tin at the problem, just throw infrastructure at the problem, right? Because developers are expensive. And I think we have to absolutely rethink that one. People's time, yes, it's important, but that's the trade-off we need to consciously go into, is if I'm not spending enough time on my project optimizing the efficiency of something, then the cost is I'm going to be burning more energy. So I'm just making that conscious decision up front and unpicking some of those decisions in the past. There's a whole bunch of other things here, like you can apply this to the development stage, you can apply this to the cloud hosting stage. Let's say, out of all of this, the cloud hosting is probably the most mature. You can get reasonable data from the cloud provider. There's a great open source project called the Cloud Carbon Footprint Tool that you can plug all of your billing data into, and it will tell you in near real time what the CO2 equivalent is of that billing information. So there are tools out there for cloud, that's quite mature. The bit I think we need to work on is the deployment. This box down in the middle, optimized deployment, CI/CD, so continuous integration, continuous development, for those of you who've not heard that term. That's essentially this push to do hundreds of releases a week. Or, people brag about this now, don't they? Like, oh, I can push a release within minutes, or, I can push out all these changes that my customers want, with, at high frequency. Great, but again, what's the cost of that? How many non-production environments do you have to make that happen? How many development pipelines have you got running? How much energy is that consuming? How much hardware is that consuming? And is it really worth it? Do you really need to be able to deploy 50 times a day, or would 5 times a week actually be fine for your customers? It's about what's right and right sizing. And that comes down to the infrastructure as well, is trying to minimize infrastructure. There are way too many organizations that have kit that's doing nothing. It's just chewing energy, it's just sitting there. And when my previous company, Tanium, I think we found at least 20% of large organizations' servers were just not doing anything useful. That's just it's not on. It shouldn't be on, sorry, that's a bit of a joke there. But, it's not right that we have this kit that's consuming energy, and it doesn't need to be in this day and age. So in summary, if you get these things right, if you start to kind of think about the upfront design and optimize things, we start to reduce electricity consumption, we reduce electronic waste, and we reduce that embodied carbon. I did have a couple more slides, but I don't know what I've done there. So I had a couple more, and I'm just checking. No, it's definitely not there. There was just a couple of practical. Yeah, sorry, I've hidden them. That's why they're not there. Apologies. You can see them on screen now, can't you? So that's fine. So there you go. I thought I wasn't going to have any technical gremlins. I joked to Guru I was prepared, and I've had one. There we go. So high-level recommendations, just quickly to kind of finish. Two quick kind of points to finish on. And I'm happy to kind of discuss these in networking later on. Start with measurement. The classic saying is you can't manage what you can't measure. At the moment, we're not measuring this stuff. If you can't measure CO2, at least measure cost. It's a reasonable proxy for emissions. It's not perfect, but to start with, it's better than nothing. Don't forget about embodied carbon. Everyone's talking about consumption, electricity usage. Think about the infrastructure and the embodied carbon. You essentially have got a debt, I suppose, of energy consumption with your infrastructure. So think about that when you make sort of transformation changes. Use a trustworthy consulting partner. Sorry, couldn't help but slip that in. So marketing are happy with me. But finally, in terms of reduction, think about that critical thinking for designing new products and services. Is the service even needed? Is the feature really, really needed? I think we need to kind of put everything through a really critical lens of, is this helping or is this just noise? Stop chasing hype. Like, is cloud right for you now? Or is cloud right for you in 3 years when the infrastructure you already have is coming to end of life? And actually it's paid off its sort of carbon debt, if you like, and it's now time to replace it. So think about, are you following the hype? Like AI, do you really need it? It's using a lot of energy. Could you actually use traditional logic that's more efficient? I'm not saying don't use AI, but I'm saying use it for the right things. Keep it simple. Strive for backwards compatibility. That's what's forcing people to change devices too frequently. I think there's a whole bunch of benefits from keeping things simple and driving for efficiency. I've already touched on sort of when do you transform and migrate. I think that's an important one. Is an offline process actually more efficient than a digital one? And you should stick with the offline process. Controversial, I know, because I know we all like to push towards the digital, but I think we have to start challenging some of these things. And then the last 2 points for the more technical architects in the room is something you can think about if you have a large sort of enterprise infrastructure deployment, particularly to cloud. Look at the region that you're operating in. Can you shift the data center or the cloud usage to another region that's generally more efficient or less water stressed, or suffering from climate change? Can you also think about shifting the time that your workloads run? So, does it always have to run at 5 p.m. every day? Could you shift that to a time when it's greener and cleaner? So there are practical things we can be getting our organizations to do to our stuff today and how we design for the future. And so with that, maybe I've got a better time for questions, I don't know. But thank you. Thanks for listening. And if anyone wants to connect, I've got the QR code on screen.
Let's all connect with Oliver. I think we should, especially for presenting such a sobering and pragmatic approach to development.
Sorry if it was depressing.
It's refreshing, to be honest. What do you think? Any feedbacks or comments? Yes, Curtis.
Thank you. Thank you, Oliver. Wondering if you heard about the situation in Spain right now with, I think it was Meta or one of the major tech companies. And there's a pushback, and it's particularly around water. Mm-hmm. And they created a campaign called Tu nube seca mi río. That's Spanish for your cloud dries my river. And tell us why they can't recycle that water. Why are they just using it and flushing it and robbing it from farmers? What the hell is going on? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I haven't heard of that specific campaign, but it's a great slogan that they've got. And it's happening in water-stressed areas all around the world. And it's because the easiest, the cheapest way is just to kind of pump clean drinking water through a system and then just dump it into or let it evaporate. So unfortunately, that wastewater has an impact on local water courses. You potentially raise the temperature of local rivers, for example. There are far more advanced, but of course slightly more expensive ways of doing more closed loop, AC. But to be honest, try not to swear, why are we putting these data centers in areas of water stress? It doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, I get it. You want low latency maybe for some users, but we're picking regions sometimes based on perhaps the cost of electricity. It's cheap because it's dirty in some cases. We need to start thinking about using the Nordic regions more, who have cooler climates. So there's a far lower. And I know that some organisations are doing it. I think Meta, to their credit, also looked at putting infrastructure in areas where there is a cooler, so they're using a more natural way of cooling their infrastructure. It comes down to cost in most cases. It's cheaper to do the quick and dirty thing that ends up evaporating the water, or putting it somewhere that's not ideal, in short. But I could talk about that one for too long, so we'll move on to the next topic if anyone's got another one.
Anyone else? There you go.
We in the corner here. Yeah. I was just thinking, is there a shift in consumptions from corporate IT that is asking for these type of things? Because there has to be a drive or a push, or at least I think that's how you sort of get this rolling. So there would be for instance, we're trying to do carbon-free steel in north of Sweden, because there is ask for it, or potentially demand. Yep. Is it the same thing in a carbon-free or more sustainable way of dealing with these things?
I think so. It's a bit like if people aren't aware of something as a problem, you don't ask for that requirement. It's like the non-functional requirement that people just overlook because they don't know it's a requirement. And I think you're right. I think if people are more, it's partly why I talk about this so much, is if people are, if particularly us, who have impact on our organizations, what decisions we take in the design and the architecture of our systems, we can start pushing the cloud provider to do sensible things. I mean, in many cases, the cloud providers have made things like water usage and CO2 available because customers have demanded it and asked for it. I think we need to be more demanding customers of these services and not just accept that it's their problem to deal with the impact of the technology. Because it is very easy to outsource the problem. It's not my problem anymore. I run it all on Microsoft, or I run it all on AWS. It's taking more ownership of that problem and making sure they're doing things the right way for you.
Yeah. We are the market.
Yeah.
So we can change it.
Cool.
Wonderful.
All right.
Give Oliver a warm thank you.
Thank you.